On a freezing night in Denver, a 6-year-old girl in a torn pink dress stood with her German shepherd, shivering in silence. Inside, waitress Clara Hayes risked everything to hand them a bowl of soup, never knowing that this small act of kindness would spark betrayal, exile, and a return 20 years later that would shock an entire city. On a freezing night in Denver, after the wind had scraped its nails across the windows so long that even the neon looked tired, a 6-year-old in a torn pink dress stood outside a diner with a German shepherd pressing close to her hip. Inside, Clara Hayes saw them, felt the old rule book tighten like a noose, and stepped forward anyway. That single step, small as a sigh, brave as a vow, is where our story truly begins. The diner sat across from the federal bus stop where engines coughed and lights blinked like distant ships. Snow powdered the lot in thin drifts that the plows never bothered to chase, and the air smelled of diesel, coffee, and the metal tang that comes when winter settles in for a long stay. Clara moved along the counter with a cloth in one hand and the weight of other people's days in the other. She was 32, freckled under the soft yellow bulbs, hair tucked into a hasty knot that said, "I'll fix it later," though later rarely came. To strangers, she looked ordinary. A plain navy cardigan over a thrifted blouse, black slacks hemmed a little crooked. But ordinary is a costume the brave have to wear, and courage has a knack for staying quiet until called. She had learned early, when her father left and her mother taught night classes, that people notice less if you keep moving. So she kept moving, refilling mugs, resetting silverware like compass points, pretending the world was simple as salt and pepper shakers in a pair. When she glanced up and saw the girl, everything in her stilled. The child was small even for 6, with pale skin gone chapped at the nose, and a curtain of light brown hair that hadn't known a brush in days. The pink dress must have been pretty once. There were still shy flowers stitched along the collar, but the hem was frayed into little flags, waving in the wind. On her wrist, an old ribbon, faded rose, was tied twice and worried thin at the edges, a knot like a prayer. The dog beside her was a study in loyalty and weather. Black and tan coat dulled by road grit, ribs faintly visible under the winter hollow, eyes the warm amber of tea steeped too long. He leaned his shoulder into the girl as if to say, "Stand behind me and nothing will pass." But he did it without a sound. When the door breathed open and the wind came in like a ghost, the shepherd did not growl. He merely lifted his head and tracked every motion with the steady vigilance of someone who had learned that safety is a verb. Clara cracked the door wider, and the hush of winter spilled in around her ankles. "Sweetheart," she said, voice gentle, the way one speaks on church steps. "You two come in before your bones turn to glass." The girl hesitated, eyes wary the way small animals are wary of hands that have not always been kind. The dog shifted, placing himself between Clara and the child without baring a tooth, a living wall with a beating heart. "It's all right," Clara told him quietly. "You're the brave one, I can see it." She opened her palms, empty, no leash, no broom, no sharp tone, and stepped back from the threshold. The girl came first, not because she trusted, but because the dog did. He trotted in, head up, tail low, and took the corner nearest the door, where he could watch the whole room. "Booth or counter?" Clara asked, trying for a joke. "Counter's where the magic soup happens. Booth's where the tired feet go to hide." A blink, then a nod toward the counter. The girl climbed onto a red vinyl stool and tucked her toes onto the rail. Clara set a laminated menu down for form's sake and went straight to the stove. The pot on the back burner had been simmering since noon. Chicken soup the color of sunrise, noodles curled like commas, carrots bright as small lanterns, thyme and bay leaf making the steam smell like memory. She ladled a generous bowl and added 2 slices of toast, buttered until the edges glistened. As she worked, she watched them in the reflection of the past window, the girl's hands trembling with the effort of stillness, the dog's ears pivoting to catch every sound. "My name's Clara," she said when she set the bowl down, "because names are small bridges and bridges matter in winter." "What's yours?" The girl's voice came out thin but steady. "Ellie." Her eyes flicked to the dog and softened. "This is Valor." At that, the shepherd's ears tipped forward as if he recognized the syllables as an oath. Valor. It fit the straightness of his posture, the quiet rule he kept. No one between the child and the exit, weight on his forepaws, ready to move toward danger or away from it, whichever saved the most. Good to meet you, Ellie. Good to meet you, Valor. Clara set the toast close to Ellie's small hands and slid the bowl nearer. It's hot, not the kind that bites, the kind that forgives. Ellie looked to Valor first as if he were the court of appeal. The dog did not sniff or beg. He simply watched with a long, patient gaze that said, "If you eat, we live." Ellie lifted the spoon. The first sip made her eyes close, not because she had never had soup, but because warmth arriving where cold has lived is a kind of miracle you have to meet with both hands. She broke the toast and without fanfare, gave the larger half to Valor, who took it with careful lips and ate without crumbs, as if manners were a code he refused to break just because the world had. Clara stayed near enough to be a harbor and far enough not to crowd the ship. She topped off the water, adjusted the heater with a kick that only long-suffering appliances understand, and tried not to count the rules she was breaking. No freebies, no loitering, no animals, no trouble. The rule book, she thought, had been written by people who had never spent a night wondering whether daylight would forgive them. Outside, a bus coughed itself into motion and pulled away, leaving a hush that felt almost kind. The diner found its rhythm again. The squeak of a booth, a fork's clink, the faraway stubbornness of the jukebox, which refused to play anything the cold did not approve. A man in a snow-crusted parka took his pie to go. A pair of college kids in puffy jackets split a grilled cheese they could have afforded twice over. None of them really looked, which is how most miracles begin in the periphery, daring us to notice. Clara watched Ellie's shoulders loosen 1 inch at a time, like a knot learning to breathe. The ribbon at the girl's wrist caught the light. Faded rose, the color of old valentines tucked into drawers. "That ribbon," Clara said softly, "is it special?" Ellie nodded, thumb moving over the knot. "It was my mom's," she said, and the past tense hung there like frost on a window. "She said when I was brave I could wear it." Valor's head came up at the word brave, and he thudded his tail once against the stool leg, a sound so gentle it felt like permission. "You are brave," as Clara said, and meant it. "A person can be tiny as a breath and still move the world." Ellie ate slowly, not because she was shy of hunger, but because hunger had taught her the math of moments, how to make a good one last. When the bowl was half empty, Clara added a little more without comment. She slid a paper napkin closer, then a second slice of toast as if it were a refilled sky. Valor watched each motion, not pleading, only learning the choreography of kindness the way a soldier learns the steps of an exit, so that, when the time comes, no one stumbles. The clock over the griddle ticked past the hour. The bus lane outside filled and emptied. The wind wore itself out and drifted into sullen quiet. Clara's shift would end soon, and with it her cover. The owner, never a villain, just a man who'd made a treaty with fear-counted inventory down to the last spoon, and called compassion a leak in the boat. Clara wiped her palms on her apron and decided, not for the first time, that if a boat sinks because you gave a child soup, you swim. "When we close," she said, "the back awning blocks the wind. It's not a home, but it's not the sidewalk either. If you need a place to rest for an hour, you can tuck in there. I don't see everything I'm not supposed to." Ellie looked at her with something that might have been hope trying on its coat again after a long season in storage. "Just till it's less cold," Clara added, and she kept her tone light because heavy things don't like to be chased. Valor glanced from Ellie to Clara and back, then stood, gave himself one brisk shake that set a confetti of snow crystals dancing off his coat, and sat down again, agreement without ceremony. From her pocket, Ellie drew out the ribbon. She tugged at the knot and worked it free with careful fingers, smoothing the frayed end over her palm as if it were silk in summer. Then she slid off the stool, stood very straight as six can stand, and held the ribbon out to Clara with both hands. "For you," she said, "so you can be brave too." For a breath, Clara could not find the kind of words that fit inside restaurants. The ribbon was light as a feather and heavy as history. She took it and felt, absurdly, as if the little bow might keep her upright when the floor tilted. I'll take care of it, she promised. And when you need it back, you ask. Ellie shook her head with grave authority. It's yours now. Valor says so. Valor's ears flicked, as if conferring a knighthood. A smile tugged at the corner of Clara's mouth. Even in grief, the world kept pockets for humor. Well, she said, I've never had a dog certify a ribbon before, but I imagine the paperwork is exquisite. Ellie's laugh was quick, startled, and then gone, as if laughter were a bird that hadn't learned the yard was safe. In the mirror of the past window, Clara saw her own face change, just a shade lighter, as if someone had lifted the lamp a notch. She reached under the counter, found an old hand towel still warm from the dryer, and wrapped it around Ellie's fingers. She poured a small cup of milk, warm to the edge of sweet, and set it beside the bowl. Tell me something about Valor, she said, because talking lets the heart remember how to fit its shoes. Ellie considered. He finds me when I get lost, she said at last, even when I don't move. The truth in it struck like a bell, soft and long. The shepherd turned his head and looked at Clara with that unblinking dog regard that makes it hard to pretend. He had scars you'd miss if you weren't looking. A faint notch in the ear, a rough patch along a foreleg where the fur grew back like a stubborn lawn. Whatever road had brought him to this child had taught him two rules. Stand between danger and the small, and remember the way back. Closing time nibbled at the edges of the room. Lights dimmed, chairs in the far booths sat up on their tables like well-behaved horses. Clara walked Ellie and Valor to the rear door. The alley wore its silence like a scarf, and the awning held the wind at arm's length. She laid an old mat down, added a folded spare apron as a makeshift pillow, and set a covered container beside it. More soup, more toast, 2 apples that had gone a bit soft, but still remembered orchards. If someone asks, she murmured, you were never here. If you need help, you knock twice and wait. I'll hear it. Ellie nodded and slid an arm around Valor's neck. He leaned his cheek into her shoulder, eyes half closed, the way guardians do when they are pretending to sleep. Good night, Ellie. Good night, Valor. Clara tucked the ribbon into her apron pocket like a lighthouse keeps its flame. Small, quiet, absolutely necessary. She stood for a moment in the doorway after she closed it and listened to the winter hold its breath. Somewhere a bus sighed. Somewhere a siren far away sang its thin steel song. Inside, the last of the lights hummed, and the clock over the griddle counted tomorrow closer. In a city that forgets most names by morning, 3 souls had learned each other's, and that is no small spell. When Clara turned the deadbolt and leaned her back against the door, she felt the ribbon press lightly against her skin, as if reminding her that bravery isn't loud. It is simply the decision to open a door and mean it. The ribbon Ellie had pressed into Clara's hands lingered in her apron pocket through the days that followed, and with each evening's shift it seemed to whisper reminders of a promise Clara never said out loud, to feed what the world had forgotten. For a week she kept to the same rhythm, moving with the clatter of plates and steam of coffee, while slipping food into quiet parcels when no one was looking. Every night, as the neon buzzed above the back door, Clara would leave a container of soup or scraps of bread near the awning where Ellie and Valor waited. Some nights the girl's cheeks glowed red from the cold. Other nights her lips were blue with weariness, but always Valor was there, standing guard with his patient amber eyes, tail wrapped around Ellie's feet like a woolen scarf. Clara found herself lingering longer each time, sharing fragments of talk, silly observations about the jukebox's broken playlists, or memories of her own childhood when she and her mother scraped through winters on boiled potatoes and hand-me-down coats. She learned that Ellie didn't speak much, but when she did, her words landed with the sharp clarity of bells in frozen air. Valor doesn't like the sound of trucks, she said once, and Clara noticed after that how the shepherd stiffened whenever a delivery truck rattled by. The child was shaping her world around the dog, and the dog was shaping his loyalty around her. But Clara wasn't alone in noticing. Rebecca Sloan had been the assistant manager of Golden Diner for less than a year, and she carried herself with the brittle posture of someone who believed recognition came only in 2 currencies, control and perfection. She was 35, with perfectly pressed suits that smelled faintly of expensive dry cleaning fluid. hair always coiled tight in a bun, as if even a strand out of place would betray weakness. Born to a family of small business owners in Dallas, she had moved to Denver after her first divorce, determined to build a new identity on ambition alone. Life had taught her that sympathy was wasted breath. Her ex-husband's betrayal had burned the idea of kindness into ashes. When Rebecca looked at Clara, she saw not a coworker, but a rival shadow stealing the light she craved. Regulars greeted Clara by name, sometimes even tipped her in pies or knitted mittens, while Rebecca's carefully perfected image rarely drew the same warmth. One frigid evening, Rebecca stayed late under the pretense of inventory, but kept her office door cracked just enough to spy on Clara's routine. From the mezzanine, she watched Clara pack leftovers: half a loaf of bread, a cup of soup poured carefully into a container, 2 apples that had lost their shine. Rebecca's lips thinned. To her, it wasn't kindness. It was theft, an erosion of rules she upheld like commandments. When Clara slipped out the back with the parcel, Rebecca followed. Hidden in the shadows of the alley, she raised her phone, recording as Clara bent down to place the food near the awning. In the dim light, Valor's head appeared first, ears high, muscles tensed until he recognized Clara. He sniffed the container, then sat as Ellie's small hand emerged from behind him to take the food. Clara touched Ellie's shoulder lightly, a gesture so soft that only jealousy could twist it into crime. Rebecca's camera caught it all, trimmed to a clip short enough to strip away context, long enough to poison. The next morning, Clara walked into Golden Diner, unaware that the ground had shifted. Customers murmured over coffee, and the cook's eyes slid away when she greeted him. Behind the counter, Rebecca stood with a cold smile and her phone in hand. Mr. Dean Grayson, the diner's owner, a man in his late 50s with a sagging mustache and eyes dulled by decades of balancing profit margins, sat at the end of the bar. He looked up at Clara with a weariness that tried to pass as authority. "Clara," he said, voice heavy, "we need to talk." Rebecca tapped her phone, and the clip played. On the screen, Clara crouched outside the back door, handing off food to a small shape half hidden in shadow, Valor's amber eyes glowing in the dim. Out of context, it looked clandestine, a breach of trust. "Explain," Rebecca said smoothly, her voice trained to sound like concern, but sharpened with malice. Clara's heart thudded, but she kept her face steady. "They're children, Rebecca, a little girl and her dog, hungry, cold. I gave them what was going to be thrown away anyway. No harm done." "No harm?" Rebecca tilted her head, her bun immovable, her smile brittle. "Imagine if customers found out food scraps were being passed out behind the diner. What would that do to our reputation? To Mr. Grayson's business?" Mr. Grayson sighed, rubbing his temples. "Clara, rules are rules. Food is inventory, not charity. You've put us in a difficult spot." For a long moment, Clara said nothing. She could have pleaded, could have raised her voice, but dignity held her silent. At last she nodded once. "Then I'll leave my apron." She folded it neatly, placed it on the counter, and without waiting for Rebecca's smug parting words, walked out into the raw morning air. Denver's wind cut deep, but it wasn't the cold that hollowed her chest. It was the thought of Ellie and Valor waiting by the awning that night, only to find nothing. She walked the blocks in a blur, ribbon in her pocket pressing like a heartbeat. That evening, she returned to the alley carrying a small parcel wrapped from her own pantry, half a loaf of bread, a jar of broth, and a knitted scarf her mother once made. The snow had drifted high, crunching under her boots as she rounded the corner. But the spot was empty. Only a scatter of paw prints led away into the dark, mingled with the faint outline of small shoes. On the brick wall beside the awning, something caught her eye. A scrap of paper, taped with the desperation of a child's hands. It was a drawing, rough pencil lines showing 3 figures sitting together at a counter. A woman with a soft smile, a little girl in a pink dress, and a dog with proud ears. Between them, a bowl of soup steaming like a sun. Clara pressed the paper against her chest, breath catching. Ellie's handwriting scrawled beneath, "Thank you." No address, no name, no clue to follow. Just a memory etched in graphite and snow. Valor's paw prints faded into the white beyond, but in Clara's pocket, the ribbon and the drawing lay side by side, proof that kindness had not vanished, only walked further into the storm. Years passed, and winters came and went with their familiar bitterness, carving grooves into Clara Hayes's life like a knife across wood. After leaving Golden Diner, she fought to rebuild herself in quiet corners, taking temporary cooking jobs in back kitchens that didn't ask too many questions. But life had a way of testing the same wound twice. Within a decade, she lost both anchors she had left. Her mother, Ruth Hayes, whose gentle words had once steadied her through sleepless nights. And later, David Palmer, the kind-hearted plumber she married after a chance meeting at a church supper. David had been a man of rough hands and easy laughter, a widower who knew how to mend leaky pipes and broken silences alike. When he died suddenly in a workplace accident just 3 years into their marriage, Clara was left again with nothing but memories and the steady ache of absence. Alone, she might have let despair consume her, but Clara was not made for despair. She carried Ruth's last words like a compass. You cannot light the whole sky, but you can keep one small flame alive. So in the worn-down neighborhood of Elyria, Swansea on Denver's north side, where freight trains rumbled and the streets carried more dust than shine, Clara rented a forgotten corner unit of a brick row building. It had once been a laundromat, its tile floors cracked and windows streaked with soot. But Clara saw what others didn't, a place where warmth could bloom. She scrubbed the walls herself, patched leaks, painted the sign by hand, and one morning hung it proudly above the door. The Hearth Spoon. The Hearth Spoon was no grand establishment, just 4 mismatched tables, a counter salvaged from a closing diner, and a soup pot that never seemed to rest. Clara cooked with her heart and served with her hands. Her first customers were the overlooked, an old man named Morris who collected cans from the alley, a mother of 3 with eyes dulled by exhaustion, children whose laughter had been replaced by the quiet gnaw of hunger. She didn't ask questions. She didn't take names. Whoever came through her door was served. Behind the counter, framed in a cheap wooden frame, hung Ellie's faded pink ribbon. To Clara, it was not decoration. It was oath, memory, and proof that kindness had meaning, even when the world turned cruel. One late afternoon, when snow was beginning to fall in lazy flakes, the door creaked open and Clara looked up expecting another weary soul. Instead, a figure padded in, first a German shepherd. Larger now, coat thick with the shine of survival. He moved with the confident grace of maturity, not the fragile wariness of the half-starved pup she remembered. His amber eyes found Clara's instantly, and for a moment the years collapsed. Her breath caught. Valor, she whispered, and the name alone was enough to make his tail sweep the air. Behind him shuffled 4 children, each with hollow cheeks and patched jackets. The oldest was a lanky boy around 12, Hispanic, with shaggy black hair and a wary expression hardened too early by the streets. His name, Clara would soon learn, was Mateo Cruz. At his side clung his sister Sophia, just 8, her face dirt-streaked but her eyes still wide with wonder. Behind them, 2 brothers, twins no older than 6, whispered to each other in quick bursts, trying to make themselves invisible. Valor moved among them like a shepherd guiding a scattered flock, nudging them gently toward the warmth inside. Clara hurried from behind the counter, her hand trembling as she reached for Valor's head. He pressed into her palm with a low rumble of recognition, eyes softening. She knelt down, fingers sinking into his thick coat, tears stinging at the corners of her eyes. "You found me again," she murmured. For a moment, the years of grief seemed to bend around that single point of reunion. The dog she once fed in the alley, standing in her kitchen, leading children who looked at her with the same guarded hunger Ellie once carried. The children hesitated until Mateo, protective and suspicious, stepped forward. He brought us here," the boy said quietly, English laced with the accent of his grandmother's Spanish. "Said this was safe." His words were odd, half believing, half questioning, but Clara only smiled, swallowing back her emotions. "Then he was right," she replied gently. "You're safe here." She ushered them to a table near the stove where the heat lingered longest, and soon bowls of steaming potato soup and warm bread appeared before them. Sophia whispered gracias before eating, and the twins tore the bread in half to share evenly, as though fairness was the only law they knew. Valor lay at their feet, content, as if his job was complete for now. Word began to spread through the neighborhood that the Hearth Spoon was more than a place for food. It was a place where you weren't invisible. Soon, people who had nothing to give began to bring what they could. A handful of carrots from a backyard garden, bruised apples left unsold at the market, a few crumpled bills slipped quietly into Clara's hand. An elderly man named James O'Donnell, once a steel worker until his back gave out, showed up every afternoon insisting on washing dishes for the sake of dignity. James was tall, broad-shouldered despite his age, with hair white as frost and hands rough as stone. He had been hardened by years of layoffs and a bitter divorce, but he found in the Hearth Spoon a place to be useful again. Clara learned that the act of scrubbing pans gave him more than work. It gave him back a sense of being needed. Another helper was Mary Ann Fields, a single mother in her early 40s with a headscarf tied over hair, thin from long shifts at the laundry. She brought her two daughters often, saying they learned more about kindness here than at any school. Mary Ann's laugh was quick and resilient, though her eyes carried the weariness of someone who bore too much alone. For her, the Hearth Spoon wasn't just about food, it was about being seen as more than a statistic. Each evening, Valor stationed himself by the door, ears alert, posture calm but commanding. Strangers learned quickly that no trouble passed through while he was on duty. Yet children adored him, crawling over his back as he lay, sprawled, tugging gently at his ears, while he accepted the chaos with the patience of a saint. It was as though Valor had chosen this place as his post, drawing lost souls to the warmth Clara offered. One night after closing, Clara lingered by the counter and stared at the ribbon in its frame. Valor patted over, rested his chin on her knee, and sighed the deep sigh of creatures who have carried too much. Clara stroked his head, voice quiet. "You came back just when I thought I'd lost every trace of her." She never spoke Ellie's name aloud, afraid that doing so might break the fragile hope she carried. But deep inside, she believed Valor's return meant Ellie's spirit was still out there, somewhere, carried in the same unseen current that had led him back to her. The Hearth Spoon, once just Clara's act of stubborn hope, was now becoming something larger. It wasn't merely a kitchen, but a small community stitched together by shared need and mutual giving. And at its heart stood Clara, apron dusted with flour, eyes tired but still lit with quiet fire, and Valor, the sentinel whose presence turned the simple act of soup into sanctuary. The Hearth Spoon had become more than Clara Hayes ever dreamed. By its third winter, the little kitchen was no longer hidden in Elyria Swansea's shadows, but whispered about across Denver as a place where you could taste warmth in a bowl. Local papers had written small features, calling it a flame in the cold or the city's quiet heart. A neighborhood photographer had even snapped Valor stretched like a lion at the doorway, while children clung to his thick winter coat, and that image circulated widely on social media. For Clara, it was never about recognition, but she saw the pride in her community's faces when they realized the world had noticed their corner of kindness. Yet light always draws its shadows. Rebecca Sloan, now polished into the image she once believed only others deserved, watched these stories from the gleaming office of her flagship restaurant, Sloan and Company, in downtown Denver. She was 40, sleek in tailored suits, her blonde hair cut in a sharp bob that framed a face honed by ambition and cosmetic care. Sloan and Company was everything Golden Diner had never been. Glass chandeliers, farm-to-table menus, and patrons in silk. To the public, Rebecca was a model of modern success. But behind that veneer lived the same hunger for control that had once made her record Clara in the alley. When she saw Clara's name reappear in newsprint, wrapped not in shame but in quiet honor, the envy rose again like bile. Rebecca had cultivated connections, publicists, influencers, even a city councilman she dined with once a month. She knew how quickly reputations could be dismantled with a whisper in the right ear. From her office with its view of the Capitol Dome, she crafted a narrative, careful and poisonous. Posts on local food forums suggesting that the Hearth Spoon's charitable meals were a cover for unsanitary practices. A blog entry under a pseudonym claiming Clara had been fired years ago for theft. A viral tweet that read, "Beware free soup that hides stolen goods. Golden Diner remembers." Within weeks, the rumors spread faster than Clara's little kitchen could defend. Health inspectors appeared at the hearth spoon unannounced, clipboards in hand, eyes sharp with suspicion. Clara, apron dusted with flour, welcomed them honestly, showing her spice racks, her spotless pans, the shelves of donated produce. But no inspection could erase the seed of doubt once planted. The inspectors posted a notice, temporary closure pending review, a yellow slip taped to the door, as cold and final as a tombstone. The neighborhood reacted not with outrage, but silence. Customers who once left thank you notes on napkins now walked past with hurried steps, eyes averted. Parents whispered that perhaps the soup had never been safe. Even Mary Ann, once dependable, grew scarce, explaining with downcast eyes that she could not risk her children's health. Clara felt the air around her change, warmth leaching into suspicion. Through it all, two figures never left her side. James O'Donnell, tall and broad as the steel beams he once welded, still stopped by each evening, leaning heavily on his cane, muttering that he'd scrub every dish in Denver to prove her clean. And Valor, ever the sentinel, lay across the closed threshold, his amber eyes daring anyone to say she was unworthy. Neighbors passing saw him there, silent, unmoving, loyal, and some whispered that no animal would guard a liar so fiercely. But whispers are frail shields against storms of envy. Clara, though bruised, did not collapse. She busied herself cleaning shelves that no longer held food, polishing glass that no one looked through. At night she would sit by the darkened counter, staring at the framed pink ribbon, reminding herself that even if the world doubted, one child once trusted her enough to give away her mother's last token. It was that memory she clung to when the snow began again, heavy and relentless, painting the city in silence. On one such night, a storm raged outside, wind slamming at the boarded window like a fist. Clara sat with James, who had stopped by with a flask of tea, his gruff voice trying to reassure her that Denver's winters always passed. Valor was restless, pacing the door, ears pricked to some sound neither of them could hear. Suddenly, through the blur of white, a figure emerged, thin at first, then clearer as she came closer. A young woman, perhaps 18 or 19, her long brown hair braided under a knitted cap, her coat threadbare, but her posture certain. She walked straight toward the hearthstone, and Valor whined low in his throat, a sound Clara had not heard from him since the night she first fed Ellie. The young woman stepped into the entryway, snow melting on her lashes, and looked directly at Clara. Her eyes were the same gray-blue she remembered, the eyes of a 6-year-old in a torn pink dress. The ribbon Clara kept framed on the wall had once tied her wrist. "Miss Clara," the girl whispered, voice trembling but strong. "It's me." Ellie Grace Clara froze, her hands clutching the edge of the counter. For a moment time collapsed the diner, the alley, the soup steam rising into a winter night. She saw not the grown woman, but the child who once gave her courage wrapped in a ribbon. James sat silent, awe in his weathered face. Valor leapt forward, pressing his head into Ellie's side, tail thudding with joy, confirming the truth no words could. Ellie smiled through tears, bending to hold the shepherd close. "He found me again and again," she said softly, "and now he brought me back to you." The storm that had carried Ellie Grace back into Clara's life seemed almost symbolic, for when it passed, a strange brightness hung over Denver. Streets that had been muffled with snow now gleamed under the pale light of a sun returning, and the air carried the hush of something about to shift. Clara, still reeling from the sight of the little girl she once fed now standing before her as a poised young woman, spent that night sleepless. Ellie had explained briefly, haltingly, that she had grown up in foster care after being separated from Valor for a time, but that fate and persistence had reunited them. More astonishing still, she had pursued the law, driven by the quiet fire born on nights when hunger and cold nearly swallowed her whole. She wanted, she said, to be the voice for people who went unheard, because once Clara had spoken for her with nothing more than a bowl of soup. Ellie Grace at 19 carried the presence of someone older. Tall, slender but sturdy, she wore a charcoal coat buttoned neatly, her hair tied in a braid that swung with determined grace. Her gray-blue eyes, once shadowed with fear, now glowed with conviction. She had studied at community college, then law school on scholarships and part-time jobs. her name slowly rising in Denver's legal circles. She was still at the beginning, a junior associate at a small but respected firm, but her arguments had already impressed judges and unsettled opponents twice her age. She was not the timid child Clara remembered. She was living proof that kindness planted in frozen ground could still blossom. When Ellie declared she wanted to clear Clara's name, Clara shook her head at first, murmuring that the world would not listen, that reputations once broken rarely mended. But Ellie's voice carried the same firmness as her mother's ribbon. It's time they do. And this time, Valor and I will stand beside you. The plan took shape swiftly. Ellie used her firm's modest network to arrange a press conference at the Denver Central Market, a bustling space where food vendors, shoppers, and journalists gathered daily. The choice was symbolic. 20 years ago, suspicion had driven Clara from a diner. Now, truth would be spoken from the heart of the city's marketplace. That morning, Clara walked hesitantly beside Ellie through streets alive with chatter. She wore her simple blue cardigan, the same she had worked in for years, hair pinned back hastily. By her side, Valor strode tall and majestic, his coat now thick and glossy, his amber eyes fixed forward like a general leading troops. Pedestrians turned to look, not only at the imposing dog but at the strange tableau. An older woman carrying herself with quiet dignity, a young lawyer with fire in her step, and a German shepherd whose loyalty bound them. When they reached the market square, the crowd was already gathered. Vendors leaned out of stalls. Curious shoppers paused. Reporters raised microphones. Clara's knees threatened to give way, but Ellie took her hand firmly, whispering, "You once held me steady when I was falling. Now it's my turn." Ellie stepped up to a portable podium, Valor at her side. The shepherd barked once, the sound echoing across the square, commanding silence more effectively than any gavel. Ellie's voice rang out, "My name is Ellie Grace. 20 years ago, I was a hungry 6-year-old, alone in Denver's winter with only this dog, Valor, to protect me. We had nothing until one woman broke the rules of cruelty and gave us soup." She turned, pointing to Clara. "That woman is Clara Hayes." Gasps rippled through the audience. Ellie raised a folded paper, then unwrapped it with reverence. It was the child's drawing Clara had kept all these years. The woman, the girl in the pink dress, the dog in the steaming bowl. She held it high, her voice steady despite emotion. "This was mine. My hand drew it the night she saved us. Proof that she gave life when the world gave none." But Ellie did not stop with memory. She called forward a young man in his 30s, Daniel Ortiz, a freelance journalist with kind eyes and a scar running down his cheek from a car accident years ago. He had grown up in Elyria, Swansea too, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of shared hardship. "I investigated," he announced, raising documents. "I traced anonymous online accounts spreading slander against the Hearthspoon, all linked to Sloan and Company. PR contractors funded under Rebecca Sloan's direction." Murmurs swelled. Rebecca herself was there, summoned by curiosity or arrogance, her blonde hair gleaming under the lights, her tailored suit pristine. She stepped forward, her smile brittle. "This is absurd," she snapped. "That woman stole from Golden Diner, and now she cloaks herself in charity to hide theft. These children she mentions, no one even knows if they exist." But at her words, Ellie spread her arms. "I exist. Valor exists. And tonight, the truth exists." With that, she produced another piece of evidence, a testimony affidavit from Mateo Cruz, the lanky boy Clara once sheltered with soup in the Hearthspoon. Now 17, he stepped forward, shoulders squared, his sister Sophia at his side. They had been silent witnesses until now, but their voices carried. "Clara fed us when no one else cared," Mateo said. "Rebecca tried to erase her kindness with lies. But we are the living proof she cannot silence." The press erupted with questions. Rebecca's face blanched, the confident facade cracking as cameras closed in. Reporters demanded comment on the accusations of sabotage, the online smear campaign, the deliberate attempts to bury Clara's reputation. Rebecca sputtered, denied, then grew frantic, her polished mask crumbling before the crowd's eyes. For the first time, her ambition stood naked as envy. Clara herself never raised her voice. When at last the microphones turned to her, she simply said, "I gave food because they were children. If that is theft, then I'll carry that label forever. Her quiet dignity struck deeper than any shouted defense. Valor, sensing the climax, barked again, sharp, triumphant. It was as though he declared the verdict on behalf of a jury larger than the city itself. The crowd broke into applause, cheers swelling, strangers wiping at their eyes. Ellie turned and wrapped her arms around Clara, holding her as if to stitch 20 years of distance into one embrace. Around them, people clapped, and Valor threw back his head in a joyous howl, sealing the moment. Within weeks, Sloan and Company faced public outrage. Sponsors withdrew, contracts crumbled, and Rebecca Sloan's empire faltered. She had built her castle on envy, and it collapsed under truth. Meanwhile, the city council lifted the closure notice on the hearthstone, and donations poured in from every corner of Denver. Volunteers arrived to paint, rebuild, and expand. The little kitchen reopened, not as a fragile spark, but as a recognized community center, with new stoves, a pantry of fresh produce, and even a small library of donated books. Clara walked its halls quietly, overwhelmed by the growth, but she never forgot the ribbon framed on the wall and the drawing now displayed beside it. For her, it was not about the building's size, but about the circle completed. The girl in pink who had once been fed was now feeding the world in return. On the night of the reopening, Clara stood by the doorway while Valor lay across the threshold, ever the guardian. Ellie, in her crisp lawyer's coat, laughed among the children, serving soup with sleeves rolled up. James O'Donnell sat with Marianne Fields, trading stories, their burdens lighter now. And for the first time in years, Clara felt not alone but home. They were three souls once discarded, an orphan girl, a stray dog, a weary waitress, now joined as family by the flame of kindness that refused to die. And under Valor's watchful eyes, they knew the city would never forget again. And so from one simple bowl of soup on a freezing night, a lifetime of change was born. Clara, Ellie, and Valor remind us that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems small or unseen. In the end, it was love, loyalty, and truth that outlasted envy and silence. Have you ever experienced a moment when a small act of kindness changed your life or someone else's? Share your story in the comments, because your words may inspire someone who needs hope today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and follow our channel so you never miss more stories of love, courage, and redemption.